6 things Jesus did that few believers dare to follow. I remember sitting down one day with a friend who had been a believer for many years. He said to me, "I love the Lord, but there are some things he taught. I'm afraid to do them because I know they could cost me friendships, my position, or even cause people to misunderstand me." I understood what he meant. We all love the image of Jesus healing the sick, calming the storm, feeding the crowds with bread and fish. But what about the moments when he deliberately reached out to the outcasts, when he stood before those with religious power and spoke the truth, knowing they would hate him for it, when he forgave the very people who were nailing him to the cross? Those aren't the moments we tend to frame on the wall, but they reveal the fullness of his path. Have you ever wondered why, if we truly want to live like Jesus, there are still things he did that most of us have never dared to attempt? It's not because we don't know about them, and it's not because they're impossible. It's because they press into the deepest parts of ourself, the places where we must choose humility over pride, love over retaliation, and obedience over control. Following Jesus is easy when the road is smooth, but it's in the moments where we have to choose what's right, even if it costs us, that we discover who we are really following. Most believers will quietly step around those crossroads, not because they don't love him, but because they're not ready to pay the price. And it's in those moments that our faith is revealed most clearly. Today I want to sit down with you, open the Bible together, and look at 6 things Jesus did, 6 things that few believers dare to follow. I'm not sharing these to make you feel heavy or ashamed. I'm sharing them because it's in these difficult choices that he invites us to walk closer with him, to experience a freedom and strength that nothing in this world can take away. Part 1. Jesus chose the unwanted and the unlikely. I want you to picture a scene with me. The sun is hot over the narrow streets of a small Galilean town. Merchants are calling out their prices. Women are bargaining for vegetables. Children are darting between market stalls. The air smells of baked bread and fish brought in from the lake that morning. People greet each other warmly, exchanging news and laughter. But not everyone is welcome in these conversations. Off to the side, sitting alone, is a man nobody wants near them. He's a tax collector, a collaborator with Rome. People avoid his eyes. Mothers pull their children away. Friends cross to the other side of the street. To them, he's a traitor and a thief. He's learned to keep his head down because the stares and whispers never stop. And yet here comes Jesus, walking straight toward him. No hesitation, no careful glance to see who's watching. Jesus stops in front of this man everyone despises, calls him by name, and says, "Follow me." In a single moment, the one who was pushed to the edges is brought to the center of God's story. And this wasn't an isolated moment. Over and over, Jesus sought out the unwanted and the unlikely. He touched lepers no one else would touch. He spoke to a Samaritan woman at a well when others would have gone miles out of their way to avoid her. He called fishermen without education to become the foundation of his church. These were not safe, respectable choices. These were deliberate, countercultural acts of love. If we pause and think about it, this is one of the clearest patterns in his ministry. Jesus didn't spend his days seeking out the people who could enhance his reputation or open doors for him socially. He spent his days seeking those everyone else ignored or rejected. And that's exactly why many of us hesitate to follow him here, because choosing the unwanted today will almost certainly cost us something. It might cost us comfort. It might cost us the approval of people whose opinions we value. It might even make us the subject of gossip or suspicion. In our world, we are subtly trained to align ourselves with those who can benefit us. We're told to network, to connect with the right people, to be careful about who we're seen with. But when we read the Gospels, We see Jesus doing the opposite, aligning himself with people who had nothing to offer him except their need. And if we're honest, that kind of ministry feels risky. We like the idea of showing compassion, but in ways that don't draw too much attention or raise too many questions. Let's bring this closer to home. What might it look like in your daily life to follow Jesus here? It could be sitting next to the coworker everyone else avoids in the lunchroom. It could be inviting the neighbor to dinner who has a reputation for being difficult. It could be visiting the family member no one talks to anymore because of old wounds. It could even mean being friends someone whose background or lifestyle is very different from yours. Not to compromise your convictions, but to show them the kind of love that Jesus showed you. These aren't comfortable choices. You might get strange looks. You might get labeled unfairly. People might assume things about you that aren't true. That's why few believers dare to follow Jesus here. We know it's good, we know it's right, but we also know it's costly. And yet this is exactly the kind of step that changes lives. It changes theirs, and it changes yours. Because every time you choose someone the world has overlooked, you step into the stream of God's grace, and you discover that His presence is already there. I've seen it happen in real life. A woman in our church started visiting a local shelter simply to talk with the residents, to listen to their stories. She wasn't wealthy. She couldn't fix their problems, but she gave them dignity by hearing them. Over time, one man told her, "You're the first person who's looked me in the eyes in months." That's the power of choosing the unwanted. It tells someone, you matter to God, so you matter to me. When we live this way, we reflect Jesus in one of the most profound ways possible. We remind people and ourselves that worth is not defined by social standing, reputation, or how useful someone seems. Worth is given by the Creator, and He has a habit of building His kingdom through people the world dismisses. Following Jesus in this is not about making grand gestures or forcing relationships. It's about opening your eyes to who's already on the margins around you and being willing to step toward them instead of away. It's about setting aside the question, how will this look? And replacing it with, how can I show them the heart of Christ? And yes, it will stretch you. It will push you beyond your comfort zone. But that's where the transformation happens, in them and in you. So who comes to mind as you hear this? Who is standing off to the side in your world, unseen and unwanted? Maybe God is calling you to walk toward them today. You don't have to have all the answers or a plan for how it will turn out. You just need the willingness to take the step. Because when you do, you'll find you're not walking alone. Jesus is already there, waiting for you both. Part 2. Jesus confronted hypocrisy, even in religious leaders. There's a moment in the Gospels that still stops me when I read it. Jesus is standing in the temple courts, surrounded by men everyone else calls holy. They wear the right robes, speak with authority, and have memorized entire portions of Scripture. They're respected, admired, and feared all at once. But Jesus sees deeper. He sees that their public devotion hides a private corruption. And instead of staying quiet, He looks them in the eye and says, "You clean the outside of the cup, but inside you are full of greed and self-indulgence." That's not the kind of statement you make if you're trying to win friends. These men held influence, not just in the synagogue, but in the political and social life of the nation. They could turn the crowds against Him. They could make life very difficult for anyone who crossed them. And yet Jesus spoke up. He wasn't rude, but He was direct. He told the truth, even though He knew it would make Him unpopular. In fact, He knew it would contribute to their plan to kill Him. Most of us struggle here. We might be willing to speak the truth to someone outside the faith, but confronting hypocrisy among those who claim to represent God, that feels like stepping into dangerous territory. We worry about being misunderstood, about creating conflict, or about being labeled judgmental. So we keep quiet. We convince ourselves it's better not to get involved. But sometimes, silence allows harm to grow unchecked. It's important to understand something. Jesus didn't confront people to win an argument or prove he was right. His goal was always restoration, to wake people up to their true spiritual condition so they could turn back to God. He wasn't trying to embarrass the Pharisees. He was trying to save them from the trap they couldn't see. That's what makes his courage so remarkable. It was born out of love. Confronting hypocrisy today might look different, but it's no less needed. It might mean gently addressing a ministry leader whose actions don't match their words. It might mean speaking to a friend about gossip that's hurting others in your church. It might mean asking hard questions when decisions are being made that don't seem transparent. These conversations are never comfortable. They require both courage and humility. Courage to speak when it would be easier to stay quiet, and humility to remember that we are also sinners in need of grace. I've seen both sides of this. I've seen what happens when no one speaks up, how small compromises grow into big scandals, and how people's faith is damaged because they feel betrayed by those they trusted. But I've also seen the fruit of loving confrontation, when a quiet, honest conversation has led someone to repent, to make things right, and to walk closer with God as a result. Those moments remind me why this matters. Of course, we need wisdom. Not every wrong requires us to march in and correct it publicly. Often, the best approach is private and gentle, and sometimes God calls us to pray and wait, instead of speaking right away. But when the moment comes and we know He is prompting us, following Jesus here means trusting Him with the outcome. We may not be thanked. We may even be resented. But if we've spoken truth in love, we've honored Him. This is why few believers dare to follow Jesus in this area. It's risky. It can cost friendships or even positions of influence. But the alternative, letting hypocrisy go unchallenged, costs far more in the long run. Jesus showed us that real love is willing to take the risk for the sake of someone's soul. And when we follow Him here, we may find that the very words that seemed hardest to say were the ones God used to bring someone back to life. Part 3. Jesus forgave before people changed. If you've ever been hurt deeply, you know how hard forgiveness can be. We usually think of it as something that happens after an apology, after the other person admits what they've done, shows remorse, and maybe even tries to make it right. But Jesus showed us something far more radical. Hanging on the cross, in agony, with nails through His hands and feet, He looked at the very people who were killing Him and prayed, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." They hadn't apologized. They weren't sorry. In fact, most of them were still mocking Him. And yet, He forgave. That kind of forgiveness doesn't make sense to the human mind. It feels unfair. Everything in us wants justice first, then forgiveness, if we feel like giving it. We tell ourselves, they need to change before I can let go. But Jesus didn't wait for change. His forgiveness wasn't a reward for good behavior. It was a gift rooted in His own character. He forgave because that's who He is. When we follow Him here, it's not about pretending nothing happened or saying the wound didn't hurt. Forgiveness is not denial. It's not excusing wrongdoing or removing all consequences. It's choosing to release the debt, to hand the offense over to God, and to let go of the right to seek revenge. And this often happens long before the other person changes, sometimes before they even realize the harm they've caused. This is one of the hardest places for believers to follow Jesus, because it goes against every instinct we have. Forgiving someone who hasn't changed can feel like letting them win. It can feel like weakness, but in reality, it's one of the strongest things you can do. It's saying, I refuse to let your actions control my heart any longer. I'm putting this in God's hands. Maybe for you, it's a parent who never gave the love you needed. Maybe it's a friend who betrayed your trust and never owned up to it. Maybe it's someone who's gone from this life without ever making things right. Those wounds run deep. And yet, Jesus shows us that forgiveness can still be given, not because they deserve it, but because you've been forgiven of more than you could ever repay. When we hold on to unforgiveness, it's like carrying a heavy stone everywhere we go. At first, we think we can manage it, but over time, it wears us down, steals our joy, and poisons our perspective. Forgiveness sets that stone down. It frees us to live without that constant weight. And the amazing thing is, sometimes it becomes the very thing God uses to open the other person's heart. They may not change right away, or at all, but your obedience plants a seed that God can water in His timing. I've sat with people who have forgiven in situations I thought were impossible. A woman who lost her son to a drunk driver, choosing to pray for the man who caused it. A man who was cheated in business, still offering help when his former partner fell on hard times. These stories don't make sense apart from Christ. They're living proof that His Spirit can empower us to do what we never could on our own. Few believers dare to follow Jesus here, because it requires us to trust God with justice and with our hearts. But when we do, we step into a kind of freedom and peace that the world can't give, and we reflect the heart of the one who looked at us in our sin and forgave long before we changed. Part 4. Jesus embraced rejection without retaliation. Rejection is one of those wounds that cuts deeper than we often admit. It's not just the sting of being told no or left out. It's the quiet message underneath. You're not wanted here. We feel it when someone we trusted stops returning our calls. We feel it when we're excluded from the table where decisions are made. We feel it when a relationship we invested in slowly fades without explanation. And it can leave us wondering what we did wrong. Or worse, if there's something about us that's simply not enough. Jesus knew rejection intimately. It wasn't just strangers who turned away from Him. His own family doubted Him. At one point they tried to bring Him home, thinking He had lost His mind. The people of His hometown, those who had watched Him grow up, refused to believe in Him, saying, "Isn't this the carpenter's son?" The very people He had come to save shouted for His crucifixion, and perhaps most painfully, the friends who had walked with Him for years scattered into the night when He needed them most. What's remarkable is not only that Jesus experienced rejection, but how He responded to it. He didn't withdraw in bitterness. He didn't retaliate. He didn't let the pain harden His heart. Instead, He kept walking in the Father's will. He kept teaching, kept healing, kept showing compassion, even to those who would never accept Him. He chose obedience over the need to be accepted. That's where so many of us struggle. Our natural instinct when we're rejected is to protect ourselves. We put up walls, tell ourselves we don't care, or quietly nurse resentment. Some of us fight to win back approval, reshaping ourselves to fit what others want. Others pull away completely, vowing never to risk that kind of hurt again. But either way, rejection begins to control us. And when it controls us, it shapes our choices more than God's call does. Following Jesus in this area doesn't mean pretending the hurt isn't real. Rejection hurts, because God designed us for connection. But it does mean deciding that rejection will not have the final word. It means anchoring our worth in what God says about us, rather than in the acceptance of people. And it means continuing to love, even when love isn't returned. I've seen believers live this out in ways that stunned me. A young woman whose closest friends abandoned her after she stood by her convictions still sent them a message on their birthdays. A pastor asked to step down by his own leadership team quietly prayed for them every day for a year. A man excluded from his own family gatherings chose to visit his parents faithfully until they passed away. None of these choices erased the pain, but each one kept bitterness from taking root. Jesus warned us that rejection would be part of the journey. If the world hates you, keep in mind that it hated me first. When we remember this, we realize rejection isn't a sign that we've failed. It can actually be a sign we're walking closely with Him. The question is not whether we will face it, but whether we will respond in the same spirit He did. Maybe you've been carrying the weight of rejection for a long time. You can remember exactly when it happened, the words that were said, or the silence that spoke even louder. Today, God invites you to bring that wound to Him. Let Him remind you that you are chosen, accepted, and loved with an everlasting love. Then ask Him for the grace to keep moving forward, not with a hardened heart, but with a heart still open to love. When you respond to rejection without retaliation, you step into a freedom few ever experience. You're no longer held hostage by the approval of others. You're defined by the one who was rejected for you, and in that identity, you'll find the courage to keep living for Him, no matter who walks away. Part 5. Jesus served in the lowest positions. If you've ever had someone serve you, in a way that felt almost uncomfortable, someone going out of their way to meet a need you didn't even ask for, you know it leaves a mark. Not because you couldn't do it yourself, but because it's rare. Most of us are used to earning help, trading favors, or at least sharing the load. But when someone humbles themselves to serve you with no expectation of repayment, it can be both moving and unsettling. That's exactly the kind of moment Jesus created for His disciples on the night before His crucifixion. The scene is the upper room. The disciples are gathered for the Passover meal. They've been on the road with Jesus for 3 years, and in a few hours He will be arrested. But instead of giving them a stirring speech or a final miracle, He does something they never saw coming. He gets up from the table, takes off His outer robe, wraps a towel around His waist, pours water into a basin, and begins washing their feet. This wasn't a symbolic ritual in their culture. It was the job for the lowest servant in the house. Feet were filthy from walking dusty roads in open sandals. This was the kind of work no one volunteered for. You can almost feel the awkward silence in the room. The men who had been arguing days earlier about who was the greatest now watch their teacher kneel before them, one by one. When He gets to Peter, the discomfort boils over. "You shall never wash my feet," Peter blurts out. But Jesus answers, "Unless I wash you, you have no part with me." He's not just talking about physical cleanliness. He's showing them that in His kingdom, greatness is measured by humility, and leadership is proven in service. Why is this so hard for us? Because serving in the lowest positions means letting go of pride, control, and recognition. It means doing things no one else sees, and that some people might even think are beneath you. In our culture, we often choose service that fits our skills, our schedule, or our comfort level. We don't mind helping if it also makes us look good. But Jesus calls us to a service that costs us something, a service that may never be noticed or repaid. Following Him here might look like quietly cleaning up after an event, when everyone else has gone home. It might mean caring for an elderly parent, whose needs are constant and exhausting. It might mean offering your time and energy to mentor someone who may never thank you. It might mean stepping into tasks that seem insignificant, but make someone else's burden lighter. These are not the kinds of acts that earn applause, but they are precious in the sight of God. I've watched believers embrace this calling and seen the ripple effect it creates. A man in our church, quietly fixed the cars of single mothers without telling anyone, slipping the keys back with a smile and no bill. A young woman faithfully visited a nursing home every week, even though none of the residents could remember her name. A couple spent years anonymously paying for groceries for struggling families, never revealing their identity. These acts didn't make headlines, but they reflected Jesus more clearly than any public achievement could. When Jesus finished washing his disciples' feet, he told them, "I have set you an example that you should do as I have done for you." This wasn't just a nice moral lesson. It was a command to embody his heart. And when we take that seriously, we begin to see service not as a task, but as a privilege. We start looking for the unnoticed places, the small sacrifices, the quiet ways to love, because that's where he is. Serving in the lowest positions will never be glamorous. It may even be misunderstood, but it's the way of Jesus, and it's the path to true greatness in his kingdom. When you kneel to serve, you're not lowering yourself, you're stepping into the very place where the Son of God chose to be. And in that place, you'll find a joy and intimacy with him that no position of power could ever match. Part 6. Jesus trusted God's timing over his own urgency. One of the most surprising things about reading the Gospels carefully is noticing how often Jesus refused to be rushed. People came to him with urgent needs, and sometimes he acted immediately, but other times he waited, not because he didn't care, but because he was listening to his Father's timing. His brothers once urged him to go to Jerusalem during a major festival, to make himself known publicly. They thought, if you want to be recognized, now's the perfect moment. But Jesus said, "My time has not yet come." When news came that his dear friend Lazarus was sick, everyone expected him to leave right away. Instead, he stayed where he was for 2 more days. From a human perspective, it looked like a mistake. From God's perspective, it was perfect. That kind of patience is difficult for us. We live in a world that rewards speed. We measure progress in how fast problems get solved and prayers get answered. We feel pressure to act quickly, to seize the moment, to do something, rather than wait. And when we do wait, we often feel anxious, as though nothing is happening. But Jesus knew the truth. The right action at the wrong time can still be the wrong action. Timing matters as much as the action itself. Think about the story of Lazarus again. By the time Jesus arrived in Bethany, Lazarus had been dead 4 days. Friends and family were mourning. Martha and Mary both said the same thing. "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." To them, he was late. But to God, he was right on schedule. The delay allowed for a miracle no one expected. A resurrection instead of a healing. What looked like a missed opportunity became a revelation of God's glory. Trusting God's timing means accepting that his plans are bigger than our perspective. It means believing that he sees the whole picture when we only see a small part. And that belief is tested most when the wait is long, when doors seem closed, or when opportunities pass us by. In those moments we are tempted to take control, to force the outcome we want. But Jesus showed us another way, to move only when the Father says. In practical terms, this could mean holding off on a major decision until you've sensed God's peace, even if people around you are urging you to act. It could mean staying faithful in a season of obscurity when you feel ready for something bigger. It could mean continuing to pray for a situation that hasn't changed in years, trusting that God is still working behind the scenes. These choices require faith, because they often go against our emotions and the advice of those around us. I've known believers who learned this the hard way. One man rushed into a business venture because the opportunity wouldn't come again. It collapsed within months, costing him far more than money. Later he said, If I had waited, I would have seen the red flags. I've also seen the opposite. A woman who felt God telling her to wait on a ministry opportunity that seemed perfect. A year later, that ministry shifted direction entirely, and the role she would have taken disappeared. Instead, God opened a door that was a far better fit. When you trust God's timing, you learn to measure success differently. It's not about how quickly things happen, but about whether you're walking in step with Him. There's a peace that comes from knowing you're not behind, and you're not ahead. You're exactly where He wants you to be. And when the moment comes, you'll be ready. Not because you pushed for it, but because He prepared you for it. Jesus never missed the Father's timing. Not once. And when we follow His example, we'll find that the waiting seasons are not wasted. They're shaping us, preparing us, and setting the stage for what God will do next. The world may call it delay, but in God's hands, it's perfect preparation. Conclusion. When we step back and look at these 6 things Jesus did, it's easy to admire them as part of His story, and then quietly set them aside, thinking, that's just who He was. But the truth is, these aren't just descriptions of His life. They are invitations for ours. Invitations to follow Him into places most people, even believers, hesitate to go. Choosing the unwanted and the unlikely. Confronting hypocrisy with both truth and love. Forgiving before anyone changes. Embracing rejection without striking back. Serving in the lowest positions. Trusting God's timing over our own urgency. None of these are comfortable. None of them are easy. And that's exactly why they stand out. These are the moments where following Jesus becomes more than a belief. It becomes a way of life. They're the choices that push us beyond self-protection and into self-denial. They strip away our need for approval, our desire for control, and our habit of measuring success by comfort or recognition. And in their place, they give us something far greater, a deeper closeness with Christ, a clearer reflection of His character, and a freedom the world cannot take away. I know how hard this can be. I know what it's like to wrestle with fear before speaking the truth, to fight the urge to hold on to bitterness, to feel the sting of being misunderstood when you choose to love the one no one else wants near them. But I also know the joy that comes on the other side of obedience. I've seen how God uses these choices to change lives, not just the lives of those we serve, but our own. Every time we step into one of these moments, we find Him there, ready to meet us, to strengthen us, and to remind us that we are not alone. So the question is, which of these 6 is in front of you right now? Is there someone you've avoided because of what others might think? Is there a conversation you've been putting off because it's uncomfortable? Is there a wound you've been holding on to instead of releasing? Is there a season you've been trying to rush instead of trust? Whatever it is, know this. The same Spirit who empowered Jesus to walk this path lives in you. You don't have to manufacture the courage or the strength. It will come as you take the first step. The world may not understand why you live this way. Some may even criticize you for it. But heaven notices. And one day when you see your Savior face to face, you'll know every costly choice was worth it. Because in those moments when you dared to follow Him where few believers go, you weren't just imitating Him. You were walking with Him, and that is the greatest reward of all.